Hello, this is Greg Crawford coming to you today with Militant Grace and sharing with you victory for today's living. I'm glad that you joined me on my podcast, and I hope that you'll stick around a little while for some word that I'm going to be sharing with you. And I just want to encourage you to bookmark my podcast site here and come back often. We're going to be adding new content. We're going to be putting some new messages up here and some music and a few other things. So I hope that you'll come back from time to time and enjoy our podcast. And if you'll just click the subscribe button so that you'll never miss something new that we put up here. Thank you again for joining us today. And now we're going to take you into a service already in progress. Well, I want to welcome you once again today to the second installment of a brand new podcast that we're calling Militant Grace, Victory for Today's Living. And I'm going to take up today where I left off yesterday, or the last program. We're entering into the book of Hebrews. And I'm asking the Lord to help me. I really want to do an in-depth study on what I call the book of better things. The whole theme to the book of Hebrews is the word better. And I mentioned this on the last program. A better priesthood, better blood, a better covenant, a better everything. Everything's better in the new. And there's a reason why I believe that Hebrews was written. And to be able to, I'm going to go into the first couple of verses of Hebrews today on the program. We're going to keep this to about 15 minutes, so this is probably going to end up being chapter 1, part 1, because there's a lot of stuff in chapter 1 that I want to get into, and it'll take me longer than just one program to do it. So what I want to do is I'm going to digress just a little bit to the last program. If you remember, I talked about the 5 things that a newspaper reporter is concerned with when it comes to writing a news story: who, what, when, where, and why. And I talked about that in the last program, and I won't belabor that point very much. But I do want to go back to 2 of them, and that is the when and the why. The when was about the middle 60s A.D., and the reason I want to go back to that real quick is I want to remind you of the when and the why, because it's very important. This is when this book was written, it was only a few short years before Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. And when I say destroyed, I mean completely annihilated. The book of Micah talks about how Jerusalem was going to be like a plowed field. And I want to tell you, and if you want to read the history of it, get a book that's called The Jewish Wars, and it's written by the Hebrew historian Josephus. And Josephus wasn't a Christian. He was just a Jew. And so there's nothing there to color it as far as, from the standpoint of Christianity. He was just a Christian, a Jewish follower who happened to be a historian, and it was just history. And he talks about everything that went on in Jerusalem during that tribulation period they experienced for 3.5 years, starting about the year 67, or about the halfway through 67, going up to AD 70. And in AD 70, the Jewish religion was completely annihilated. All the priests were killed. The temple was completely demolished. They literally plowed up the foundations of that temple, burned everything with fire, left nothing standing with that temple. The daily sacrifices stopped. The annual blood sacrifices stopped. And according to Josephus, it was over 200 years before the Jewish religion began to make a comeback. So it totally destroyed it. And that's the when part. And the why part is, that's why this book was written. Or one of the reasons, because Paul and I think Paul wrote the book, But Paul was showing, the Jewish Christians to whom he really wrote the book. And I think obviously it finally made its way out to all the other Hebrews, because, the book was written to the Hebrews, which of course is the Jews. And it found its way to all of them. And he was letting them know there's something better, because he knew in his heart that that in a very short period of time, there would be no Judaism. I mean, it was over. And that's one of the things that I'm going to talk about today. One of the things that really helped me in my thinking about biblical things was when I began to understand what the end meant. When I began to understand what the Bible was talking about in the Old Testament, when it was talking about the coming day of the Lord. And I began to realize that he wasn't talking about the end of the world. As far as the word in the Greek, that word is cosmos. And the word cosmos means the world as we know it, the trees, the stars, the sun, the moon, the stars, the trees, the oceans, the world, the planet, the who we are. But when that word was translated in the Greek, it was the Greek aeon, which is the age. And like, for instance, in Matthew 24, when the disciples come to Jesus and they say, what is going to be the signs of the end of the world and of your coming? Well, they didn't ask him what was going to be the signs of the end of the cosmos. When is the world going to blow up? That's what people are waiting on now. They're waiting on an atomic bomb to blow the world up. But that's not what he was saying. He was saying the end of the age. And the end of the age was going to be the age of the law. And it was going to bring in the age of the Gentiles. And that was going to happen at the time of the writing of the Hebrews, only 4 or 5 years. So, we know that the coming of Jesus brought in the new covenant. Well, the new covenant completely done away with the old covenant. As a matter of fact, as we get on into chapter 1 of Hebrews, you're going to see as we get into it that God talks about the world, and there's that word again, not cosmos, but aeon. The age is going to go away like the folding of a garment, and there's a new age coming in. And the new age that's coming in is the kingdom age, the age of the Gentiles. It's the age of the new covenant. So when the new covenant come in, it completely replaced the old covenant. And that was a big deal, guys. That was a huge deal, because ever since God gave the law to Moses back in the Old Testament, people had been under that old covenant, and they had lived under that old covenant. And when I say people, I really mean the Jews, because when you go back and look and see how it was delivered, the law, I hate to tell you this, but the law was never given to the Gentiles. You had to literally become a Jew, be circumcised, and become a Jew in order to be able to get under the law. Gentiles were never under it. But nonetheless, the Jews lived under it for thousands of years. But Jesus came preaching that something was coming. As a matter of fact, John the Baptist came, and he said the axe is laid to the root of the tree. Well, he was talking about the law. He was talking about Judaism. And he said everything that's exalted is going to be brought low. Everything that's a valley is going to be filled up. And I'm preparing the way of the Lord. And what was his message? The kingdom of heaven is at hand. I mean, guys, that's powerful. That is powerful. There was something else coming. There was a new covenant coming. Jeremiah, I think it's chapter 31, talks about that I'm going to take away all of this, and I'm going to put my law in your hearts. You're not going to have anybody to teach you, because I'm going to put it on the inside of you. That was the new covenant. And that's what Jesus came to do, was to establish a new covenant that was going to be done by the Spirit. It wasn't going to be by the letter of the law that killed, but it was going to be by the Spirit. And that's what this age is talking about. So the reason that this book was written, number one, was to prepare the Jews, because something was about to happen. And I want to tell you, and I'll get into it later, but it talks about it 2 or 3 times in the book of Hebrews, and we'll get to it as we get into this. I'm not in any hurry at all. I'm going to take my time and break this down as God gives it to me, and I'm going to pray that God will help you to be able to see this and understand it. But the why of this was to show them, don't be discouraged when this thing comes to an end. And believe me, it did. Because when Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected, the new covenant actually began. It actually began. But the old covenant was still practiced by the Jews. And, and like I said on the last broadcast, the early Christians that comprised up the church was almost 100% Jews. And so the early church was really a Jewish sect. It was a Jewish church, right? And they kept the feast. They still offered sacrifices. They did the stuff that they did, except they confessed Jesus Christ. So I want you to picture in your mind 2 circles, like you would take a piece of paper and you would draw 2 circles on that piece of paper. So if you got a piece of paper, just do it. Draw 2 big circles side by side on a piece of paper. And now move those circles over to where they overlap each other, okay? And now you see the 2 circles, and then you see in the middle of those 2 circles where they overlap is a small little area that's also encircled. That right there represents the first circle represents the old covenant. The second circle represents the new covenant, but that little area in the middle there that's overlapped represents that 40 years from the time that Jesus ascended back to heaven and the time when Jerusalem was destroyed. You remember what Jesus said in Matthew 24 when he prophesied all this stuff, when the armies was going to surround Jerusalem, when tribulation was coming, when all those things he said. He said, this generation shall not pass away until all of these things be fulfilled. So we know by reading the Bible, we go all the way back in Exodus and Numbers, we see that a generation is basically 40 years. So, Jesus was, around 30 to 33 AD is when he completed his ministry and went back to heaven. So that would put this 40 years at about exactly where it actually happened, which was AD 70. So therefore, for 40 years, there was a mixture that was preached. And, like I said, the Jewish religion was still strong. They still had priests. They were still offering sacrifices, the feast and all that. And that was one of the things that Paul fought, because Paul went out and preached the new covenant. God absolutely delivered him and gave him the revelation of the new covenant, and he went out and preached it. And the Judaizers would all come behind him and tell the people that, it's good that you know who Jesus is, but you got to keep these feasts. And that mixture was there, and that was that little area in the middle. Well, when Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70, that little area in the middle went away because that first circle went away. And when it did, the only thing that was left, because Jerusalem was gone, I mean, it didn't even exist, not one stone. The only thing that was left of Jerusalem was that wall that is still there today. And the only reason Titus left it there was to show the power of Rome, that somebody would look at that and see what what Titus did to Jerusalem. So I'm still setting this up, and I can't believe that my time is almost up already. My God, this 15 minutes goes by so quick. But never fear, because I'm going to take up on the next one and take up where I left off on this one. But thank you very much for joining me today. I've not even really got into the meat of this yet. I'm so excited about teaching this to you, and I really want you to get your Bibles, and I want you to get ready. I'm going to give you a bunch of scriptures. Next time on the next program, I'll move into Hebrews chapter 1 and verses 1 and 2. But we love you guys. God bless you. Until the next time, this is Brother Greg.